It ignites the instant it touches air, not seconds later, not after it splashes. The moment the chemical inside breaks open and meets oxygen, it burns white hot, hot enough to cause first-degree burns at close range without ever making contact with the flame. And it reacts so violently with water that dousing it does nothing reliable to put it out. Army evaluators in Vietnam watched this happen from a launcher small enough to carry on one shoulder, and their after-action paperwork described a serious answer to a problem that had been getting American soldiers killed since World War II. That problem was the flamethrower. The man carrying it strapped 60-odd pounds of pressurized fuel to his own back, then walked toward the enemy to use it, because the weapon only worked at bad breath range. The Army had been trying to fix that math for 2 decades. What they built instead looked like a plastic and aluminum box with 4 tubes bolted together. No fuel tank, no hose, no exposed operator creeping toward a bunker. It fired rockets instead of a stream, and it hit from 10 times the distance, all while weighing less than half of what the man before him had to carry into the same fight. Troops in the field called it a rocket launcher. What they were actually holding was a flamethrower's replacement, built to solve everything wrong with the original without carrying fire on your own back to do it. Here's what should surprise you. Most people who know Vietnam-era weapons inside and out have never heard of this thing. Not the casual history buff. Not the guy who can name every rifle carried by every infantry division. Even plenty of Vietnam veterans who served alongside grunts carrying M16s and M60s never crossed paths with it, because it was never handed out like a rifle. It was distributed in limited numbers to selected units taking part in combat evaluations, not issued routinely the way a rifle or a machine gun was. That's not because it failed. It's because it was issued sparingly from the start, tested hard in a narrow window of the war, and then folded into the Army's inventory almost without notice. No big rollout, no press conference, no mention in the evening newsreels that covered every other new piece of hardware coming out of Vietnam. It solved the real problem for the men who got their hands on it. It just never became common enough to stick in the popular memory of the war the way the M16 or the Huey did. No scandal buried it. No single disaster made headlines. It simply did its job in the background of a war everyone was already tired of hearing about. And by the time anyone might have written its story properly, the country had already moved on to forgetting Vietnam as fast as it could. This is the story of a weapon that did exactly what it was built to do, and still got erased from the story everyone tells about Vietnam. To understand why the Army wanted this thing, you have to understand what it was replacing, and what that replacement had been costing. The M2 Flamethrower traced back to World War II. 68 pounds loaded. A soldier strapped it to his back, carried it into range of a bunker or a trench line, and triggered a stream of burning fuel that had to travel maybe 20 to 40 yards before it hit anything. 40 yards from an occupied enemy position is not a safe distance. It is barely outside grenade range. The man carrying that tank was the single most valuable target on the battlefield, and every enemy gunner in earshot knew it. The exposed fuel tank made him easy to pick out, and a lucky hit on it could rupture or ignite the fuel. Not the movie fireball, but bad enough that carrying it into range of an enemy position was a genuine gamble every time. By the mid-1960s, the Marine Corps had seen enough. In October 1966, they put in a formal requirement for something that could deliver an incendiary round from 100 meters out, 5 times a flamethrower's working range. The Army agreed. In August 1968, the 9th Infantry Division sharpened that requirement further, asking for a flame weapon that could take out a bunker from 200 meters or more, far outside the kill radius the enemy was used to defending against. The program got a name: Ensure 263, one of the Army's rapid fielding initiatives built to get new equipment into Vietnam fast, skip the usual years-long procurement grind, and let the men actually fighting the war tell the engineers what worked and what didn't. There was history behind that urgency. The M2 Flamethrower had already served through World War II, through Korea, and into Vietnam. And by the late 1960s, the enemy had spent 2 decades learning exactly how to counter it. Guerrilla tactics, dense jungle growth that closed the little distance the weapon had left, and the simple fact that anyone carrying a fuel tank stood out to every rifleman on the other side, all of it had eaten away at how useful the old flamethrower actually was in country, even while it stayed on the books as standard issue for 3 separate American wars. The Army didn't just want a lighter version of the same idea. They wanted the exposure problem solved outright. What came out of that requirement wasn't a better flamethrower. It was something that abandoned the entire concept. No tank, no hose, no fuel line running down a man's spine, just 4 rockets in a launcher a single soldier could sling over one shoulder. If it worked, a soldier could deliver the same effect a flamethrower produced without ever walking into range of the people he was trying to burn out. Northrop's electromechanical division built it, and they didn't start from scratch. They took the rocket motor from the M72 LAW, proven, already in mass production, trusted by every infantryman who'd fired an anti-tank round out of one, and gave it a completely different job. Instead of a shaped charge warhead meant to punch through armor, the new M74 rocket carried an M235 warhead, packed with roughly 1.33 pounds of a substance the Army designated TPA, thickened pyrophoric agent. TPA gets mistaken for napalm constantly, even in official-sounding write-ups. And it isn't. Napalm is a thickened gasoline that has to be ignited by something else, a fuse, a spark, a separate detonation. TPA is triethyl aluminum, an organometallic compound thickened with a polymer called polyisobutylene, and once it's exposed to open air, it needs no separate ignition source at all. It combusts on its own contact with oxygen. The rocket still carried a fuse, a base detonating design that ruptured the warhead casing on impact and let the agent do the rest. It burns at somewhere around 1200 degrees Celsius, over 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to inflict burns from proximity alone. Army documentation even warned that looking directly at the flash from close range could damage a soldier's eyesight. The launcher itself held 4 of these rockets in a factory-loaded clip, dropped into the back of a boxy plastic and aluminum housing that weighed just over 11 pounds empty, up to about 27 pounds once loaded. A soldier could fire a single rocket or run through several in rapid succession, 1 per second, semi-automatically, then swap in a fresh clip and go again. A folding reflex sight built into the housing meant he didn't need a separate optic to aim it. Doctrine called for a 5-second gap between individual shots to keep the backblast and the weapon's own heat under control, even though the launcher was mechanically capable of firing faster if a situation demanded it. Compared to the 68-pound flamethrower it was meant to replace, it was less than half the weight, with roughly 5 times the reach against a fixed target, and a maximum range that stretched out past 700 meters against an area target. On paper, it was everything the 9th Infantry Division had asked for 2 years earlier. Lighter, safer to carry, and able to reach a bunker aperture from a distance no flamethrower operator had ever dreamed of. This weapon didn't wait for peacetime to prove itself. It went to Vietnam wearing an experimental designation, XM202, paired with the XM74 rocket, together forming what the Army called the XM191 system. And it went there to be shot at real targets by real infantrymen, not tested on a stateside range. A joint Army-Marine Corps team demonstrated the system in-country between February and March of 1969. The units that saw it responded well, and the Army moved straight into full combat trials that ran from 1969 into 1970. That commitment wasn't small. The Army shipped over 1,000 XM202 launchers into Vietnam, 1,095 of them, along with more than 16,000 rocket clips, and put them into the hands of units already carrying the weight of the war. The 4th, 23rd, and 25th Infantry Divisions, the 1st Cavalry Division. After 90 days, the trial expanded further into the 1st Infantry Division, the 101st Airborne Division, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, and brigades pulled from the 5th and 9th Infantry Divisions. This was not a boutique test run by a handful of specialists. Well over a dozen major Army combat formations put this weapon through its paces before the war was even close to over. The Army concept team in Vietnam ran the evaluation and filed an interim report in March 1970 that laid out exactly what the men in the field were telling their chain of command. They liked the range. They liked being able to hit a bunker aperture or a tree line from well outside grenade distance, something the old flamethrower could never offer. They liked having 4 shots ready before they had to reload, instead of a single stream that ran dry. Later Army doctrine put numbers behind that satisfaction. A 4-round sequence was rated at roughly a 50% probability of hitting a bunker aperture at 50 meters, a window at 125 meters, a weapons position or a parked vehicle at 200 meters, and a squad-sized formation out to 500 meters. Figures the old backpack flamethrower could never have approached. What they didn't love was the bulk of the thing on top of everything else a rifleman already carried, and the logistics of keeping specialized rocket clips forward in units that were already stretched thin on ammunition resupply. There was a darker side to that combat proof too, one that had nothing to do with the enemy. The same property that made TPA so effective, instant ignition on contact with air, made the weapon genuinely dangerous to the man carrying it. Firing it wasn't simple either. The backblast alone carved out a danger zone roughly 50 feet behind the operator where nothing could safely stand, with a wider caution zone stretching even farther back, which placed serious restrictions on firing it from confined positions with an obstacle close behind the gunner. If an M74 warhead cracked open before it was fired, whether from rough handling, a bad drop, or enemy shrapnel finding the clip on a soldier's back, the agent inside needed no fuse to go off. It just needed oxygen. And because 4 of those warheads rode together in a single factory-loaded clip, damage to one exposed the pyrophoric agent right next to the other 3. A severe hazard for the operator and anyone standing near him, documented in the same evaluations that praised the weapon's range and its punch. The XM202 earned its combat reputation honestly. A weapon that solved the flamethrower's exposure problem for the enemy, while creating a new one, largely unremarked, for its own operator. By the time the weapon officially became the M202 in 1978, standardized and cleared for full production, the war it had been built and bled for was already 3 years over. That timing tells you almost everything about why it never became a household name. It had already done its hardest work under an experimental designation in trials that shaped the final design before the shooting in Vietnam stopped. The Army had a fully proven weapons system on its hands right as the fight that justified building it came to an end. What killed its momentum afterward wasn't a battlefield failure. It was a mix of doctrine and competition. Through the 1970s and into the 80s, both the Army and Marine Corps were rethinking what a shoulder-fired weapon needed to do. And a launcher that could only deliver incendiary fire was a narrower tool than commanders wanted going forward. The threats the military was now planning for looked less like jungle bunkers and more like armored vehicles. And a single-purpose incendiary launcher didn't fit that picture the way it had fit Vietnam. The Marine Corps found its answer in the Mark 153 SMA, a shoulder-launched weapon that could switch between a dual-purpose round effective against bunkers and light armor and a dedicated anti-armor round for main battle tanks, giving a single system the versatility the M202 never had. Once the SMA entered service in 1984, the Marine Corps phased the M202 out in its favor. On the Army side, training on the weapon largely wound down through the same decade, though records on exactly how far it was pulled from active inventories are murkier. Leaked equipment registries dated 2007 suggested the M202A1 was still in the Army's inventory and had been deployed to Afghanistan, a claim the Army disputed at the time, and how widely or in what numbers those launchers actually saw use remains unclear. Add to that the storage problem. The same pyrophoric fill that made the weapon so effective in the field made it a liability in a supply depot. TPA-filled warheads left in storage for extended periods had a documented tendency to leak, turning a shelved weapon into a hazard nobody wanted to keep issuing troops, let alone stack in a depot alongside other ordnance. The SMA, by comparison, offered commanders a single, shoulder-fired system with conventional high-explosive ammunition, and none of the storage headaches tied to a pyrophoric fill, which made the choice between the two systems an easy one once the SMA was ready. A launcher that was hard to store safely and increasingly outmatched by a more flexible rival didn't need a single dramatic failure to fade out. It just needed better options to show up. The M202 never vanished entirely. Standardized in 1978, refined into the M202A1 not long after, it stayed on paper as a fielded U.S. weapon system for decades, even as the training pipeline behind it and the ammunition stocks that fed it quietly thinned out. South Korea fields its own version, the KM202A1, with its own field manuals, much the same reserve stock fate it found at home. In 2004, of all places, the design resurfaced as one of 3 interchangeable weapon options tested on Swords, one of the U.S. Army's early armed ground robots. A strange coda for a weapon originally built to get a human being out of the flamethrower's kill zone. Today, what survives mostly survives as inert display pieces. Deactivated launchers in private collections and museum cases. Data plates still legible. Tubes permanently rendered incapable of firing. Sold now as pieces of Cold War-era history, rather than working weapons. It's a familiar movie prop, too. Instantly recognizable to anyone who's watched an action film from the 80s, even if most of those viewers have no idea what they're looking at or where it actually came from. That's the quiet irony of the M202. A weapon extensively trialed by more than a dozen U.S. Army divisions and brigades in the middle of a shooting war. Built to solve a problem that had been getting men killed since 1944, ended up better known from a movie screen than from the history books. It earned its place in the long line of American infantry incendiary weapons the hard way. In combat trials most people have never read about. For a war, most people don't even associate it with at all. If you want more stories like this, the weapons that did their job and still got buried by history, hit subscribe and drop a comment with the piece of gear you think deserves the same treatment. There are more of them out there than you'd think. We'll dig the next one up together.